I think we're going to bring in Shahid Buttar. He is running against Nancy Pelosi for the, and Shahid, you got to help me out here when you get on what district, what is the number, Nancy Pelosi's, the congressional district that you're hoping to represent come, I guess, January 2021?
Yeah, it's the California's 12th, and it's basically San Francisco is the scope of the district. It doesn't extend any further beyond San Francisco, and it's not all of the city, but most of it. So the 12th congressional district in California is the one that I'm running for.
Now, we spoke, I don't know, it feels like a lifetime ago, but maybe it was 9 months ago on Ring of Fire. We replayed the interview recently, actually in February, I think it was. Folks can go back. I think it's February 20th. But Matt, maybe you can, or February 17th. And I got to say, you know, I've interviewed a lot of challengers this year. Just broadly speaking, my sense about primarying anybody, even candidates that I like, I have come to find as being extremely useful and helpful in and of itself. Some of these challengers are, you know, are really strong. Some are not so strong, but they're still holding people to the fire. I think I said this when I introduced the interview in February. I'm convinced that anything that is decent has happened in New York State is a function of Cynthia Nixon's challenge, and maybe Zephyr Teachout's prior to that of Andrew Cuomo. But with all that said, I found you, of the literally dozens of challengers that I interviewed, to be one of the most impressive people I've spoken to, period, regardless of where you're situated.
That's very kind of you. Thanks, Sam.
Well, I mean, it's just the fact, and I'm just trying to set it because we're breaking a little bit of format today. But I also want to say that, you know, earlier this week, and I think this is what basically Brendan and I had been talking about this for a while. And I was like, yes, let's do it Friday, because I have been just so disturbed by the failure of the Democratic leadership, and particularly the most powerful Democratic leader right now that we have.
Yes.
The only person who has any like legislative power, any ability to direct committee hearings, to direct investigations, is refusing to do so. The best she has done is send a letter, and we'll play a clip of this in a moment. But, you know, in 2018, there was a challenge to her leadership. And I know that you're not running for the leader of the House. You will not be the leader of the House.
That's right.
But there was a challenge to her leadership. And my feeling was like, she is the most experienced person to do this job. Tim Ryan, I don't like his politics. I am at the point now where I would prefer to have someone whose politics I don't like, who may not be competent. And I'm not being facetious here. I'm saying, like, strategically speaking, than to have someone who is very competent at shutting all of her caucus out in the decision making, and unilaterally deciding in an incredibly undemocratic small d way that there will be no dissent, that I will be the only person in Washington. I'll be running this. I'll be shutting down all investigations, and I'm going to be cosplaying being upset at what we're seeing going on. I mean, it's aghast. And so, I mean, obviously in terms of representation in San Francisco, that's one thing, but for a national audience here, the idea of Nancy Pelosi not being, and because I think that she's going to go back on that promise to not continue her leadership.
Right. Yes. Right.
And
well, she won't have a chance because we're going to remove her first, but please go on.
Well, that's what I'm hoping. And I should also say, you know, there are stories out now where the Republicans have basically conceded that they're not going to take back the House. So we don't need Nancy Pelosi's supposed 14-dimensional chess where we don't do anything as the Democrats, because that'll give something to people to criticize. And we want, you know, Donald Trump to fail on his own. That to me seems like either horrible strategy, a failure of rising to the moment, and maybe just BS. But with that said, just tell folks a little bit about yourself, why you're running, and then we're just going to get into the show.
Okay. Yeah, sounds good. And I'll tell a little bit about myself, and I'd love to just respond to your comments there about Pelosi. You know, my name's Shahid. I live in San Francisco. I'm a constitutional lawyer and a political artist. I've been organizing at the vanguard of the left for the last 20 years. I was one of the first courtroom advocates promoting marriage equality for LGBTQ couples. I fought the surveillance state, particularly over the last decade. I came to this run after having worked most recently at the Electronic Frontier Foundation for 4 years, where I was fighting surveillance at the local level around the country and defending net neutrality. I am tired of my city being represented in Washington by a relative moderate, even conservative. And if there was any place that I'd push back on your sort of intro remarks there about the speaker, I think you're absolutely right that she has been entirely ineffective in supposedly resisting this president. But I think even that, frankly, is too charitable, because it's not that Nancy Pelosi is incompetent. She is entirely too competent at suppressing the left. She fights progressives the way we wish that she would fight Trump. Another way to put that is that she showed up to Washington under the Trump administration like a boxer throwing a fight. And the last 2 years have been a sustained series of capitulations, from funding his concentration camps to supporting his military budget, supporting his corporate trade deal, on the very same day that she announced a theatrical impeachment exercise that kept him in office because she limited it, particularly to take off the table the most severe charges, the ones that could have swung GOP votes in the Senate. So all I would say there is that she has certainly not been effective in challenging Trump. I dare say that the facts beyond MSNBC rhetoric suggest that she is actively complicit in the abuses of the right wing, and the events of the last week, where we see Americans across the country taking to the streets to vindicate our most basic principles, like the right of Americans to make it home at night without being slaughtered in the street by paid people who we employ to keep us safe. As we're taking to the streets to defend those rights, it's not merely the case that she has not joined and been entirely unhelpful and limited her solidarity to showing up with a Bible and quoting from Ecclesiastes. She has actively engineered the policy paradigm to which we're responding. She is an agent of mass incarceration and militarized police. And so to expect her to be part of the solution is, frankly, Pollyannish, and I'm done waiting for Democrats to prove their solidarity with the American people. And that's why I'm here to offer San Francisco an alternative.
Yeah, and I got to say that, one of the things that was clear during the impeachment hearings, and just to give people, because the knee-jerk response that sometimes we get in this instance is like, what would you do? Like, what could she possibly do? And I think, as narrow and as anemic as the impeachment effort was, one thing that was clear is that you could see that when the Democrats said, we're going to impeach him for this, that it created public support for impeachment, because it's almost like a reaction shot in movies. Like, when the Democrats say what you're doing is wrong, or for instance, today, for example, 300 employees, writing or support staff employees from the New York Times are doing a virtual walkout to complain about Tom Cotton's name.
The Tom Cotton, not that great.
Yes. But what that signals to people is, if they're reading it and they don't know anything about it, or they only read about it, or they haven't made an assessment, is that, wow, they think it's wrong enough that they would walk off the job.
Yes.
This is pretty serious. And when Nancy Pelosi does nothing but send a letter, let's play this clip. When she does nothing but send a letter, she is basically prompting, look, I've been watching, I've seen what's going on. I mean, I know how disturbing it is to have police who are unmarked and no accountability. But your average person who doesn't follow politics, may not be engaged in this, they are looking to the leader of the Democratic Party to basically provide for them what's good, what's bad. I mean, it's pretty simplistic, but that's what it is. And here is how hard she went at the president of the United States for creating an unnamed federal paramilitary force.
Soldiers on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, Bureau of Prisons officers in Lafayette Square, the National Park Service doing that violent act, hassling peaceful protesters the other night. States have sent in National Guard troops from other states. The FBI and other federal agencies are operating in the city. We want a complete list. Who's in charge? What is the chain of command? And by what authority do these National Guard people come in from other states? By what authority? What is the mission? What is the chain of command? Who is in charge? We want some answers to that.
God.
She held up a letter. Now,
Jesus.
there is another mechanism where you can get those answers, and that is called subpoenaing people.
Right.
And you could subpoena the White House officials. They won't show up, but you could subpoena if they're prison guards going there, you subpoena the head of the prison where you know that they're coming from.
Well, and with all due respect, even that's weak. I mean, even a subpoena, we're talking about asking questions. We're past the point of needing to ask questions. We should be writing bills to defund agencies. There's no reason that these agencies have the resources to conduct these missions. There's only one branch of the government that controls the purse strings, and it's led by Nancy Pelosi, who basically has unilateral control over the chamber because she's the Speaker of the House. And will she show up to leverage the House's substantial authority to limit the other branches by defunding them? That is the power that she has, that she has never seen fit to use. And if there's ever a time in U.S. history where we need the House to show up and actually deny the resources to the executive branch that it uses to strangle democracy in America, it was last week. It is now, it is tomorrow. And she's not showing up for it. She hasn't shown up for it. She's not showing up for it now. And I don't expect her to tomorrow. And it's all the more reason that we have to get her out of there. And just to be clear here, I don't think I'm the answer to anybody's problems. I'm one vote in a chamber of 435 people, and I will certainly be casting different votes than her. But I'm painfully aware of how limited the influence will be that I will have if I'm successful in removing the speaker. But the key valence of our race to the nation is that it will force the gavel into someone else's hands. Someone like Pramila Jayapal, someone like Barbara Lee, someone who voted against the Patriot Act, someone who, instead of like Pelosi reauthorizing it 10 times, someone who stops wars for profit instead of like Pelosi cheerleading for them at every opportunity, someone who's tried to stop human rights abuses by the CIA instead of being part of a continuing 15-year cover-up over it like Nancy Pelosi, someone who stands with the American people instead of Wall Street like Nancy Pelosi. And I, seeing that clip, it's just such a vivid demonstration. You nailed it. It's a failure of leadership, and the American people need better at a time like this.
And I will tell you that I am, and I sort of alluded to this earlier, but I am increasingly of the mind, like I said, in 2018, going into that election, and there was this challenge to Nancy Pelosi for her leadership there. There was no squad.
Mm-hmm.
There was not a progressive caucus with the leadership that it has now that are being far more aggressive. Even the frontline Democrats, supposedly 1/3 of them or 1/4 of them joined with the progressives to do an end round around Pelosi. Yep. I'm not convinced that, frankly, with the power the progressives now have as a cohesive unit where we don't have the blue dogs that we used to have, that we're not even better off having a less ideologically aligned Speaker of the House, who it's their job to have to cater to the progressives and bring the progressives to the table to get legislation passed, rather than the progressives, so-called progressive leader of the House, having to supposedly placate people who are actually trying to do an end run around her. I am it's the first time I have ever had this sort of idea. I do think there is value in having a foil, particularly one who comes in there with a lack of experience and, frankly, without the strength of a cohesive caucus in the Democratic Party. And I think, that's if someone's telling me that Ryan's going to be speaker tomorrow, I would see that as an upgrade in terms of the ability of progressives to get more. Because Nancy Pelosi, like you said, has completely shut down progressives and has created this dynamic of we can't attack Pelosi because she's ostensibly, with us. Ostensibly, but she has not been, and it's quite clear. And at one point, Lucy pulls the football out from under you, and you say, "Wait a second, he's not interested in me kicking this thing."
Yeah.
All right.
It's the perfect analogy, and just to develop that one piece, it is amazing to me that so many Democrats see in the supposed leadership of, and let's just disaggregate who she is. We're talking about a wealthy oligarch born into privilege in a powerful East Coast family who governs by theater. To that extent, she's basically exactly like Trump. We're talking about privileged people with class interests that make them immune to the pressures that many of the rest of us face, and they govern like it accordingly. There's no reason to expect a wealthy landlord to show up for rent and mortgage relief in the middle of a pandemic. when millions of Americans are struggling and trying to figure out how to stay in their homes. There's no reason to expect a matriarch of a political dynasty to care about an off-duty FBI agent shooting unhoused people in San Francisco. And she hasn't asked a question about that. And all the local leadership here is aghast. And this happened months before the recent crackdown. And an unhoused neighbor of mine on my block gets shot by an off-duty FBI agent. The Board of Supervisors, the DA's office, even the police department here says, this is insane. Somebody needs to ask questions. Well, there's someone here who could ask questions. Exactly one person here who could ask questions. Her name is Nancy Pelosi, and she has better things to do. And that willingness to abdicate the needs of the district, and particularly here to guard the right wing. I mean, we haven't touched on this, but I think it's really revealing her endorsements in Texas and Illinois when she endorsed Henry Cuellar over Jessica Cisneros and Dan Lipinski over Marie Newman. And while Jessica didn't beat Cuellar, I'm very grateful that Marie knocked Lipinski out. And it's, again, a reflection of Speaker Pelosi's failures. She backed not just incumbent Democrats.
Right.
We're talking about reproductive authoritarians against challenges by young progressive women of color. And as you know, for all the people who say Nancy Pelosi is a strong women leader, you know, I'm grateful that she has broken some glass ceilings, and I am profoundly ungrateful for her willingness to abandon even the most basic tenets of feminism. I mean, the idea that she's trying to keep people in office who would deny women the right to control their own bodies, it's heinous to me, not just disqualifying. And as a constituent, frankly, I'm outraged. And the only thing that's different for me now than, you know, in the mid 2000s, when she was funding Bush's wars, is that my outrage has just continued to build for so long. And I'm thankfully in a position now where I've picked up the skills and the network where I can actually take this seat from her. And I'm grateful for the tens of thousands of people around the country who are flocking to our campaign and putting us in a position to do exactly that.
Well, I mean, I can't speak for everybody who's listening and watching the show, but I think there's a lot of people who are very excited at the prospect of you doing just that. And her support, I mean, it's one thing, like you say, it's one thing to have a sort of like a blanket, I'm going to support incumbents because, you know, I have a transactional relationship with these people and but when you're talking to those two instances, these are people who are not even voting in support of Democratic initiative. Like they're voting with Trump more often than they are with the Democrats.
Exactly.
And, you know, that's not a hard sell to other incumbents. Like I will support incumbents 98% of the time. In fact, I think that would actually be closer to 99% of the time based on the number of incumbents are in office, as long as you're actually voting with us the majority of the time. And you're not stepping on a key principle of our coalition, like a woman's right to choose, which is under severe threat. I mean, that to me seems literally the least you could do to provide. But and you know, we have seen she's appointed the DCCC leadership, and we have seen they are perfectly willing to blackball vendors and other organizations that are supporting challenges, as I'm sure you know.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, they're also willing to support some in some instances if it's ones that they like.
That's right.
So there's not a principle that's going on here. This is an ideological fight.